The outcast of Nova Prime. The gleaming corridors of Nova Prime Station stretched endlessly before Xena Frost as she made her way through the morning crowd. At 7 feet tall with a muscular frame that could bend steel, she towered over the other residents who parted before her like water around a stone. Their whispers followed in her wake, a familiar chorus of fear and disgust that had been her constant companion since childhood. Another of those enhanced ones. Can't believe they still let them stay on the station. Did you see her arms? She could crush a bulkhead. Xena kept her eyes forward, her face a carefully maintained mask of indifference. After 26 years of life on Nova Prime, she had learned to wear her isolation like armor. The station's population of 50,000 pure humans had made their stance clear: genetic enhancement was an abomination, a reminder of the dark days before the Great Reform when humanity had nearly destroyed itself through unchecked genetic manipulation. The fact that Xena's enhancement had been a medical necessity, a last resort treatment for a deadly childhood condition, made no difference to them. In their eyes, she was tainted, dangerous, a walking reminder of humanity's hubris. She reached her workplace, a maintenance bay in the outer ring where she served as a heavy equipment specialist. It was the only job she could get, the only place her enhanced strength was seen as an asset rather than a threat. The bay's massive doors slid open with a hydraulic hiss, revealing the familiar chaos of machinery and tools. "Morning, Chief," called out Rook, her direct supervisor and one of the few people on the station who treated her like a human being. The gruff old engineer had hired her 3 years ago, ignoring the station council's concerns about having an enhanced individual in such a critical facility. "Morning, Rook," Xena replied, her deep voice echoing in the cavernous space. She moved to her workstation where a damaged cargo loader awaited her attention. The machine's reinforced frame had buckled under extreme stress, a problem that would require hours of careful manipulation to repair. For Xena, it was just another day at work. As she began the repairs, her enhanced muscles easily handling the heavy components, Xena's mind wandered to the latest station announcement. Nova Prime was preparing to host its first diplomatic delegation from the Kithrai, a newly discovered spacefaring species. The station was buzzing with excitement and anxiety about the impending first contact. "Heard they're bringing in extra security for the aliens," Rook mentioned casually as he passed by her station. "Council's worried about incidents." Xena knew what he meant. The last time something important had happened on the station, a visit from Earth's president 3 years ago, she and the station's handful of other enhanced individuals had been quietly asked to remain in their quarters for the duration of the visit. For their own safety, of course. "Let me guess," she said, her voice tinged with bitter amusement. "They want us to make ourselves scarce." Rook's silence was answer enough. Xena focused on her work, her enhanced strength allowing her to bend the loader's frame back into shape with careful precision. Each movement was measured, controlled, a constant reminder that despite her power, she was not the monster they feared. The day wore on, marked by the rhythmic sound of machinery and the occasional burst of chatter from the other workers who kept their distance from her station. As she worked, Xena caught fragments of conversations about the upcoming diplomatic visit. The Kithrai were apparently a species of incredible technological advancement, with a society based on principles of genetic diversity and adaptation. The irony wasn't lost on her. As her shift ended, Xena made her way to her quarters in the station's lower levels, where most of the undesirable residents were housed. The apartment was small but functional, its walls decorated with holographic art she had created herself, swirling patterns of DNA helixes and celestial bodies that reminded her of the vastness beyond the station's walls. She stood at her viewport, gazing out at the star-filled expanse. Somewhere out there, she thought, there had to be a place where being different wasn't a curse, where strength was seen as a gift rather than a threat, where she could finally stop measuring every movement, every word, every breath against the impossible standards of a society that had already decided she didn't belong. The station's announcement system crackled to life, reminding all residents about additional security protocols for the upcoming diplomatic visit. Xena closed her eyes, letting the artificial gravity ground her as she had done countless times before. Tomorrow would be another day of careful movements and measured words, of proving through every action that she deserved the space she occupied. But tonight, in the privacy of her quarters, she allowed herself to wonder if the arrival of these aliens might somehow change things. If a species that embraced genetic diversity might help Nova Prime see that different didn't always mean dangerous. It was a foolish hope, perhaps, but hope, like her enhanced strength, was something Xena had never quite learned to suppress. The Kithrai diplomat. The arrival of the Kithrai diplomatic vessel sent ripples of excitement through Nova Prime. Unlike the sleek, standardized design of human ships, the Kithrai vessel was an organic masterpiece, its hull seeming to pulse with bioluminescent patterns that shifted like auroras in the void of space. Ambassador Drake Valtherin stood at the docking port, his towering 9-foot frame draped in living fabric that changed colors with his breathing. His species' natural form was already causing quite a stir among the human welcoming committee. The Kithrai were a race of adaptable beings, their bodies capable of tremendous variation in size and form. Drake himself was considered modest by his people's standards. "Welcome to Nova Prime, Ambassador Valtherin," Station Director Petra Nash said, her voice steady despite her obvious discomfort at having to crane her neck to address him. "We hope your stay here will mark the beginning of a prosperous relationship between our peoples." Drake's multifaceted eyes took in the assembled humans, nodding their nearly identical heights and builds with curiosity. "The honor is mine, Director Nash, though I must admit I find it strange to see such uniformity in your population." A flicker of discomfort passed through the welcoming committee. Director Nash's smile became slightly fixed. "We believe in maintaining humanity's natural form, Ambassador. It has served us well." "Natural is a relative term, is it not?" Drake's translator rendered his musical language into standard English. "Among my people, adaptation is considered the most natural state of being." The diplomatic party moved through the station's pristine corridors, Drake's guards, each dramatically different in appearance, drawing stares from passing residents. One had crystalline growths extending from their shoulders, another seemed to float on a cushion of electromagnetic energy they generated themselves. As they passed the maintenance section, Drake's attention was caught by movement in his peripheral vision. Through a transparent partition, he spotted a tall human female working with heavy machinery, her enhanced musculature evident even at a distance. Unlike the others, she seemed built for power rather than conformity. "Who is that?" he asked, interrupting Director Nash's rehearsed speech about station specifications. Nash followed his gaze and paled slightly. "That's just one of our maintenance workers. Shall we continue to the diplomatic quarters?" But Drake had already moved closer to the partition, studying Xena with undisguised interest. "She's different from the others, enhanced, perhaps, fascinating. Among my people, such adaptation would be celebrated." "Ambassador, please," Nash said quietly. "That subject is sensitive here on Nova Prime. We prefer not to discuss genetic modification." "Prefer not to discuss it, or prefer to pretend it doesn't exist?" Drake's color-changing skin, rippled with patterns that his cultural attaché would later explain, indicated intense curiosity mixed with concern. Inside the maintenance bay, Xena had become aware of the attention. She straightened up from her work, meeting Drake's gaze with a mixture of defiance and surprise. For a moment, they simply regarded each other, two beings who didn't quite fit the mold their societies had cast for them. The moment was broken by Director Nash diplomatically steering the party toward the residential wing. But Drake's interest had been piqued, and he made a mental note to learn more about this intriguing human. Later that evening, in his assigned quarters, Drake reviewed the station's public records. The information about enhanced humans was buried deep, but it was there, a dark chapter in human history that Nova Prime seemed determined to forget. The genetic wars, the subsequent reforms, and the resulting prejudice against those who carried modified genes. "Fascinating and troubling," he commented to his assistant, Vex, whose body was composed partly of living metal. "They fear difference so much they would reject their own kind." "It's not uncommon among developing species," Vex replied, their metallic components catching the light. "Fear of change, fear of potential. The Kithrai went through similar phases before the Great Understanding." "Yes, but we learned to embrace diversity," Drake said, his skin shifting to deep blues of contemplation. "These humans, they've gone backwards. They've taken their fear and institutionalized it." He continued reading, learning about the small community of enhanced humans who lived on the station's margins. Most were products of medical necessity rather than choice, their modifications saving them from certain death in childhood. Yet they were treated as pariahs, relegated to manual labor and kept away from proper society. This can't continue, Drake decided, his skin rippling with determination. If Nova Prime wants to join the galactic community, they must learn that diversity is not a weakness to be feared but a strength to be embraced. The diplomatic mission, Vex began cautiously. We'll proceed exactly as planned, Drake assured them, but perhaps we can help these humans see themselves more clearly in the process. After all, isn't that what diplomacy is truly about, understanding not just between species but within them as well? He moved to the viewport, watching the star's wheel slowly past as the station rotated. Somewhere in the lower levels, that enhanced human woman was going about her life, carrying the weight of her society's fear and prejudice. Drake's people had a saying, "Change begins with a single ripple in still waters." Perhaps it was time to create some ripples on Nova Prime. As the station's day cycle dimmed to night, Drake began composing a message to Director Nash. He would request a tour of the maintenance facilities tomorrow, officially to inspect the station's infrastructure, but really to begin understanding this hidden aspect of Nova Prime's society. The director would have to agree. Refusing would be a diplomatic faux pas, and once that door was opened, who knew what changes might follow? In the quiet of his quarters, Drake allowed himself a moment of hope. His people had learned to celebrate their differences, to see variation as a source of strength rather than weakness. Perhaps, with time and patience, the humans of Nova Prime could learn the same lesson. Revelations in the deep. The first warning came from deep within Nova Prime's reactor core, a subtle fluctuation in the magnetic containment field that most engineers might have missed. But Zena's enhanced senses picked up the change immediately, a discordant note in the usual symphony of machinery. "Rook," she called out, her voice tight with concern, "we've got something wrong in Section 7. Her supervisor hurried over, checking the readings on her console. The numbers looked normal, but Zena could feel it, a vibration in the station's structure that shouldn't be there. "I don't see anything, Zena," Rook said, frowning at the display. "Trust me," she insisted. "Something's failing in the containment system. We need to evacuate the lower levels now." Before Rook could respond, Ambassador Drake arrived with his entourage for the scheduled maintenance bay tour. Director Nash followed, looking distinctly uncomfortable about having the Keithrai diplomat in this section of the station. "Ah, perfect timing," Drake said, his skin shifting to warm, welcoming tones as he spotted Zena. "I was hopping to meet." The ambassador's words were cut off by a violent shudder that ran through the station. Warning klaxons began blaring as emergency lights bathed everything in pulsing red. "Containment breach in Reactor Section 7, the station's AI announced. "Emergency protocols initiated. All personnel evacuate immediately." Chaos erupted in the maintenance bay. Workers rushed for the exits as emergency bulkheads began descending. Director Nash's face had gone pale. "If we lose containment in Section 7, half the station could be irradiated," she whispered. "The automated system should handle it, but they're not designed for this type of failure," Zena finished. She could feel the growing instability through the deck plates. "The containment field is collapsing in a pattern the computers won't recognize until it's too late." Drake's multifaceted eyes studied her intently. "You can sense this." "Enhanced neural sensitivity," Zena explained quickly. "I can feel the magnetic field fluctuations, and I know how to stabilize them, but I'd have to get to the core manually." "Absolutely not," Director Nash cut in. "It's too dangerous. We'll follow evacuation protocols and—" Another violent tremor rocked the station. Systems began failing across multiple decks as the containment breach grew worse. "There's no time," Zena argued. "In 20 minutes that reactor goes critical. I'm the only one who can get through the radiation and reach the manual controls." "She speaks truth," Drake said, his skin now pulsing with urgent patterns. "I can sense the danger as well, though not as clearly as she can. Director Nash, your station's survival depends on letting her act." Nash looked between them, terror and prejudice warring on her face. Another shock wave made the decision for her as secondary systems began to fail. "Do it," she whispered. Zena was moving before the words were fully out of Nash's mouth. She sprinted through the maintenance corridors, her enhanced muscles carrying her at speeds no normal human could match. Behind her, she heard Drake offering his own assistance. Apparently his species had natural radiation resistance. They reached the reactor level to find it already flooding with radiation. Normal humans would have died in minutes, but Zena's enhanced biology could handle the exposure. Drake moved beside her, his alien physiology adapting before her eyes to the hostile environment. "The manual controls are through there," she shouted over the roar of failing machinery, "but the access corridor is blocked." Indeed, a collapsed support beam had sealed off their path. Without hesitation, Zena braced herself against the beam, her enhanced muscles strained as she lifted the massive metal structure, creating a gap. "Go," she ordered Drake, "I'll hold it." The ambassador slipped through, his body rippling with effort as he absorbed more radiation. Zena's arms burned as she held the beam, her enhanced strength pushed to its limits. Through their neural links, station personnel watched in amazement as camera feeds showed the enhanced human and the alien working together to save them all. Minutes stretched like hours as Drake worked on the containment controls, following Zena's shouted instructions. She could feel the magnetic field starting to stabilize, feel the chaos in the reactor's heart beginning to calm. When it was finally over, when the klaxons fell silent and the emergency lights stopped flashing, Zena let the beam down gently. She was drenched in sweat, her enhanced body already working to repair radiation damage. Drake emerged from the control room, his skin cycling through patterns of relief and triumph. "It seems," he said with what might have been a smile, "that today Nova Prime was saved by exactly the kind of diversity it fears." Medical teams found them there, supporting each other as they made their way back to the main levels. Word of what had happened spread quickly through the station. Security camera footage showed the dangerous, enhanced human risking her life to save everyone. It showed her strength being used not to destroy, but to protect. In the medical bay, as doctors marveled at how quickly her enhanced healing factor was dealing with the radiation exposure, Zena received an unprecedented stream of visitors. Station residents who had previously avoided her now came to offer thanks. Some even apologized for their past behavior. Director Nash arrived last, looking somewhat lost. "We owe you an apology," she said quietly. "And much more than that, your differences didn't just help today, they saved us all." Zena met her gaze steadily. "Differences aren't weaknesses," she said. "Sometimes they're exactly what we need to survive." From his own medical bed, Drake watched the scene with satisfaction, his skin glowing with patterns of hope and possibility. Sometimes, he reflected, it took a crisis to break down the walls of prejudice, and sometimes those walls needed to come down for true strength to emerge. The station's near disaster had done more than reveal the value of Zena's enhanced abilities. It had cracked the foundation of Nova Prime's carefully maintained conformity, letting in the first rays of change. The question now was, what would grow in that light? The bridge between worlds. 2 weeks after the reactor incident, Nova Prime was a station in transition. The rigid social barriers that had once seemed impenetrable were beginning to crack, though not without resistance. In the station's grand conference chamber, Zena found herself in a position she never thought possible, seated at the diplomatic table alongside Ambassador Drake and Director Nash. "The Keithrai Collective would like to extend an formal invitation," Drake announced, his skin shimmering with ceremonial patterns. "We believe there is much we could learn from each other, particularly in the field of genetic adaptation and enhancement." Director Nash shifted uncomfortably in her chair. "Ambassador, while we're grateful for your help during the crisis, genetic enhancement remains a controversial topic among our people. Yet you sit here with living proof of its benefits," Drake gestured toward Zena. "Without her enhanced abilities, this station would be a radioactive husk floating in space." Zena remained quiet, observing the interplay between human and Keithrai politics. The past 2 weeks had been surreal. Workers who had once shunned her now sought her advice on complex engineering problems. Children no longer ran from her in the corridors. Instead, they asked to see her lift heavy objects, their eyes wide with wonder rather than fear. Perhaps, Nash said carefully, it's time we reconsidered some of our positions, but there are centuries of history to overcome. The genetic wars nearly destroyed humanity. Because you feared difference, Drake's assistant Vex interjected, their metallic components gleaming. But difference itself was never the enemy, it was fear that brought you to the brink of destruction. Xena finally spoke up. Director, I've lived my entire life being told that my enhanced body made me dangerous, less than human. But during the crisis, these differences saved lives. Maybe it's time we stopped seeing adaptation as a threat and started seeing it as a tool, one that can be used for good or ill, depending on the hands that wield it. The chamber fell silent as her words hung in the air. Director Nash studied her thoughtfully, seeing not the dangerous, enhanced human of old prejudices, but a woman who had risked everything to save those who had shunned her. The Kethri Collective, Drake continued, would like to establish a permanent embassy on Nova Prime. More than that, we would like to create an exchange program. Your enhanced citizens could visit our worlds, learn from our society where genetic diversity is celebrated. In return, we could help you understand how to safely integrate genetic advancement into your culture. You make it sound so simple, Nash sighed. Not simple, Drake corrected, his skin rippling with earnest patterns, but necessary. The galaxy is vast and filled with species of all forms. If humanity wishes to take its place among the stars, it must learn to embrace diversity not just among other species but within itself. Xena felt a surge of hope. I would be willing to be the first, she offered, to visit the Kethri worlds to learn from them. Someone needs to build the first bridge. The meeting continued for hours, delving into details of cultural exchange, safety protocols, and diplomatic arrangements. But beneath the formal discussions, something profound was shifting. Nova Prime, long a bastion of genetic purity, was taking its first tentative steps toward change. Later that evening, Xena stood with Drake in the station's arboretum, watching the artificial sunset paint the hydroponic gardens in gold. The ambassador's skin had taken on the warm hues of the fading light. Your people will resist, he said quietly. Change never comes easily to those who have built their society on fear. I know, Xena replied, but they're already changing. I've seen it in small ways. The maintenance crew invited me to their gathering last night, first time in 3 years. A parent asked me to teach their child about engineering. They're starting to see past their fear. And are you ready for what comes next? The Kethri worlds will be very different from anything you've known. Xena smiled, watching the light play through the leaves above them. All my life I've tried to make myself smaller to fit into a world that wasn't built for me. Maybe it's time I found out what it's like to live somewhere I don't have to pretend. You could be more than just a visitor, Drake said carefully. The Kethri Collective would welcome you as one of our own. Many of our people have undergone similar enhancements to yours, though by choice rather than necessity. The offer hung between them, full of possibility. Xena considered it, feeling the weight of the choice before her. She could leave Nova Prime behind, find a home among people who celebrated rather than feared her differences. But something held her back. I need to stay, she said finally. At least for now. If things are going to change here, they need people who can show them how. Besides, she added with a slight smile, someone needs to maintain that reactor. Drake's skin rippled with what she had learned to recognize as approval. A bridge needs anchors on both sides, he agreed. You've chosen a difficult path, but perhaps the most important one. As night fell over the arboretum, Xena felt a sense of peace she had never known before. The station that had once been her prison was becoming something new, not just a home, but a place of transformation. Tomorrow would bring more challenges, more resistance from those who clung to old fears. But for the first time, she felt truly ready to face them. She was no longer just the station's outcast. She was becoming something more, a bridge between worlds, a symbol of what humanity could become if it dared to embrace rather than fear its own potential. Transformation. 1 year after the reactor incident, Nova Prime had become unrecognizable. The station's once uniform corridors now buzzed with diversity. Kethri diplomats walked alongside human residents, their varied forms drawing curious glances rather than fearful stares. In the newly established Cultural Exchange Center, Xena stood before a group of wide-eyed children, both human and Kethri. And that's how we maintain the station's gravitational systems, she concluded, setting down the complex machinery she'd been demonstrating. Any questions? A small human girl raised her hand. Miss Frost, my brother was born with a heart condition. The doctors say he needs genetic treatment, but my parents are scared. Can you tell them it's okay? The question struck deep. Zena knelt down to the child's level, aware of how her enhanced frame still towered over the girl, but noting how the child showed no fear. What's your name? She asked gently. Myra. Well, Myra, being different isn't something to fear. Sometimes, like with your brother, it's something that can save us. Would you like to meet someone who might help your parents understand? She gestured to the back of the room where Nexus, a young Kithrai medical specialist, waited. Their body was a harmonious blend of organic and engineered elements specifically designed for healing. My people have been using genetic adaptation for millennia, Nexus explained, moving forward. We've learned that change, when guided by wisdom and compassion, is nothing to fear. The children gathered around Nexus, fascinated by their bioluminescent patterns. Zena watched with satisfaction. This was what she had stayed for, these small moments of transformation, as the next generation learned to see difference as something to celebrate rather than fear. Later that day, she made her way to Director Nash's office for their weekly meeting. The station's leadership had undergone its own evolution. Nash, once the strictest advocate of genetic purity, now led the initiative for integration between enhanced and non-enhanced humans. The Medical Council approved 3 more enhancement procedures this month, Nash reported as Zena took her seat. All for critical health conditions. The success rate has been remarkable thanks to the Kithrai protocols. And the public response? Better than we could have hoped. Having the Kithrai here, seeing how they've mastered genetic diversity, it's changing perspectives, though we still have our critics. Indeed, not everyone had embraced the changes. A vocal minority still called for a return to the old ways, warning of the dangers of playing God. But their voices were growing fainter as success stories mounted. Ambassador Drake's proposal arrived this morning, Nash continued, activating a holographic display. They want to establish a permanent medical facility here, a place where humans can receive genetic treatments under joint human-Kithrai supervision. Zena studied the plans, noting how the facility's design incorporated elements of both cultures. It's not just a hospital, she observed, it's a statement. Yes, Nash agreed, and they want you to help run it. The offer shouldn't have surprised her, but it did, me. You've become something of a symbol, Zena, the enhanced human who saved the station, who chose to stay and build bridges rather than retreat into isolation. The Kithrai respect that, so do I. Zena stood and walked to the viewport, gazing out at the stars. A Kithrai ship was docking, its organic hull pulsing with welcome patterns. Below it, a human transport prepared for departure to the Kithrai homeworld, carrying the first group of medical students to study their advanced genetic techniques. A year ago, I couldn't even eat in the main cafeteria, she mused. Now you want me to help run a revolutionary medical facility. Times change, we change, Nash joined her at the viewport. Sometimes it takes an outsider to show us who we really are or who we could be. The decision wasn't difficult. I'll do it, Zena said, but I want to stay involved with the education program too. The children, they're the ones who will really determine if this change lasts. That evening, Zena returned to her quarters, no longer in the lower levels but in the main residential section. Her walls still displayed the DNA helix artworks, but now they were joined by Kithrai biological sculptures and certificates of achievement. A message waited for her from Drake, who had returned to his homeworld but remained in regular contact. The seeds we planted are growing, his recorded image said, skin shifting through patterns of joy and pride. Your station has become a model for others. The Earth government has requested information about our integration protocols. Change is spreading, Zena, you helped make that possible. She smiled, remembering their conversations in the Arboretum a year ago. She had chosen to be a bridge, and that bridge was now becoming a highway, carrying humanity toward a future it had once feared. In her bedroom mirror, Zena studied her reflection. Her enhanced form hadn't changed, she was still too tall, too strong, too different by old Nova Prime standards. But the station had changed around her. Her differences were no longer flaws to be hidden but gifts to be shared. As the station's night cycle began, Xena reviewed her schedule for tomorrow. Morning engineering rounds, afternoon classes with the children, evening consultation with the medical facility planning committee. Her life had become a testament to what she had always believed: that difference wasn't a weakness but a strength waiting to be understood. Outside her viewport, Nova Prime rotated slowly against the star-filled backdrop of space. The station's lights traced patterns through the darkness, no longer uniform and rigid but diverse and dynamic. Like its inhabitants, the station had learned to embrace change, to see beauty in variation, to understand that true strength lies not in uniformity but in the courage to be different. Xena Frost, once the outcast of Nova Prime, had become its beacon of transformation. And somewhere in the vast expanse of space, other stations, other worlds, other societies were beginning to learn the same lesson: that the future belonged not to those who feared change but to those who dared to embrace it.